So we want now, knowing what we know about total productivity, this particular kind of S-shaped curve that we expect to see in the world, let's use that to find out something about average and marginal productivity. So as before, when we did total revenue and I said average revenue is the total divided by the quantity and the marginal is the extra you get from the next unit, in the same way, average productivity is basically equal to the total productivity, however much output you produced, divided by the quantity of labor you used to produce it. So if you got, if one worker gave you 1 apple, the average productivity is 1. If when you bought the second worker, because of division of labor, you ended up getting 3 apples, the average productivity is 1.5, right? Then, so you begin to see that. So obviously you start at 0, no workers, no productivity, and you don't really divide by 0. But you initially see the average productivity go up, but then 5th worker, you're getting 8 apples, 8 by 5. 6th worker, you're getting 9 apples. So eventually, the average productivity, the productivity per worker starts going down because extra workers are not adding that much. So the average has this shape. Now I'm going to show you something about the marginal. The reason that average productivity is going up, right? So supposing each worker just added 1 apple. Average productivity would be a straight line, and marginal productivity would just be the same thing, right? It would be like each worker is adding 1 apple. Right? That would be like, say you got a GPA of 3. The GPA of 3, remember, is an average. You took your grade in each class, you added it up, and you divided it by your number of credits. That's your GPA, right? If you got 3 for 5 credits and 3 for 5 credits, you took 6 divided, and you took an average, and there you are. That's your GPA. If next term you again got 3 for that quarter, your total your average, your GPA doesn't change, right? The average stays the same. But supposing here initially in your first quarter you new to college, you didn't do as well. Second quarter, your skill improved, better skilled, more skilled labor, right? Things like that. So in the same way, initially the first worker added 1, right? Now what happened? The second worker added 3, right? So what that means is the marginal productivity was 2, right? So higher. The average was 1.5. So the marginal productivity is going up like this, right? So as long as marginal productivity is higher than the average, it'll pull the average up. Just the same as if in the next quarter you got your GPA, like you got a 4.0 next quarter. It doesn't mean your your average, which is your GPA, becomes 4, but it means that you got a better GPA in the next quarter. It's going to pull up your GPA, which is your average, from 3, right? So the marginal, the extra, when it is higher than your existing average, it will pull the average up. So the marginal productivity is higher at this point than the average productivity. But then at some point the marginal, we know because law of diminishing marginal productivity, it starts to come down. The average is still going up, but because the marginal is still higher than the average. So supposing at some point I had a 4.0 and I got a 3.8. My GPA was 3.2, so I got a 3.8. It's still going up, but not as much, because not as much as it did when I went with 4.0, right? So it's still going up because you still got better GPA grade than your existing GPA, but your marginal is coming down. You got senioritis, you're not working as hard, right? So then what happens is, if the law of diminishing marginal productivity, we know eventually the marginal productivity is going to start coming down. It's not negative. You're still adding product. You're just not adding as much, right? You're adding like half an apple, 1 apple, whatever. You're just not adding much, but you're still adding apples, move with more workers. But at some point you're coming down and you will hit that average. And marginal productivity here, start coming down, hit that average, and when it hits this average, it becomes lower than the average productivity. So it's like, all right, I had a 3.0, I now got a 2.8. That's going to pull my GPA down. So if next quarter's GPA is lower than my existing GPA, it will pull my GPA down. If next quarter's GPA is higher than my current GPA, it will pull my GPA up. As long as the margin is higher than the average, average will go up. Margin starts to become lower, average will come down, which means the marginal productivity is also got this particular bell shape, but it is going to look like this, where it hits average productivity, where average productivity is at its peak. This is going to be a very important concept when we come to costs. So average productivity is total productivity divided by the amount of labor you're using, total output divided by the amount of labor you're using, marginal productivity equal to the extra output per extra worker. Right? And this is what's going on. So the real world understanding of an S-shaped total productivity curve, which I explained in the previous video, results in a particular way in which we are going to see average productivity and total productivity work. To this, we will now have to do some work to move from productivity to costs, because so far I've only talked about what the workers produce, but I haven't talked about what the workers cost, because I have to pay them a wage, right? So I'm going to have to add that information in, A, and B, I'm going to have to convert my productivity intuitions or ideas, which are done on the basis of per unit input, into a cost concept, which is based on per unit output. How much does it cost to produce each apple? So I'm going to have to do some work to move from this to that. So now the next stage is going to be, how do I take what I know about labor productivity or productivity in general based on the law of diminishing marginal productivity, and how do I take all this information, convert it into information about per unit cost? Because eventually, remember, what I want to get at is total revenue minus total cost. And so I've got to convert all this into total cost. So we now come to cost curves.